The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses, nonprofits, and HR practitioners better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources needed to get HR right. For more information, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, HR and leadership experts John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian dive into the stories that matter most to you, our listeners. We have found that there is a lesson in every story. And now our host, John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian. Chuck, how are you?
Another episode of the HR Stories podcast. And Chuck is doing great. Chuck feels fine. Chuck is ready to rock and roll. And I know we've got some good stories, HR stories in the news. But before we do that, what are you up to, John? It is as we record this, and as we're looking towards the end of April, and I know May got a big class coming up on nonprofits, HR for nonprofits. So we've got a number of nonprofit HR folks that listen, and not just HR folks, John, but like executives of nonprofits, right? And they have to run HR.
Well, a lot of times, right, in the nonprofit world, we don't have an official HR person. Those duties are spread out, and we find when we do this class, and so the class is, I can't remember the exact title, Chuck, you're putting me on the spot. It's HR for nonprofits, navigating the employee experience. And a lot of those things, hiring, dealing with performance issues, and all the kind of stuff that you have to deal with in HR, we're breaking it down and talking about it from the nonprofit point of view. And it's different. It's not that different, but it is different. There's some benefits to working in the nonprofit world in terms of HR and managing that, in terms of mission and vision. Employees are more working for their passions than in other places. However, there's rules and regulations that we need to follow. And so in this class, we kind of break this down and we talk about best practices. We talk about the laws that we need to follow. And I'm really looking forward to it. It's our first real full day class, and we're focusing on the nonprofit leaders. So it's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. John is leading that. I'll be there in the background taking questions. So we've got some great stuff. But hopefully we won't have the massive HR fail that I ran up against this past week. And it's not me, folks. It's not me. Sure. I may be doing HR. Maybe I had a fail or two, but first of all, I'd never admit it here on camera.
That's how we learn,
I don't
Chuck.
think I did. Well, so a lot of times with technology, remember we've talked about this before, technology, we're trying to make it fit. So it's like, okay, it's making our lives better, but garbage in, garbage out. Sometimes we rely on technology. And I saw an article the other day and it said massive HR fail. And here's the headline: congratulations, exclamation point. HR gives worker letter congratulating them on their 4.75 raise, but then the amount they will still be paid remains the same. So I'm like, what is that? So apparently the form letters basically went out and said, you've got a 4.75% raise, congratulations. But then in the calculations part of the letter, they ended up with 0. Well, why is that? Because they started too late in the year to get any of an increase, but the letter still went out with congratulations. I guess it should have said, congratulations. If you had been here for a full year, you would have received this raise, but you didn't. So I just thought, and it comes along with, you still have to have human eyes and human touch on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, again, right. And we've talked about AI and artificial intelligence and all that kind of stuff. And the way I look at artificial intelligence, this is, again, comes up in the news probably once a week. It's there. We need to use it so we have a better connection with our employees. Yeah. And I mean, think about that employee, right? I get that letter. I'm reading it. Oh, great. 4.7 increase. Wow, that's going to be great. I'm going to be spending it on blah, blah, right? They've already spent it, right? Or they're already like, oh, I can put that in my savings. And then they look down and go, wait a minute, I'm not getting anything. So now, as the HR person, think about that conversation, Chuck.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's nothing you could say unless you give them that 4.7% raise, whatever. There's nothing you can say that's going to make them feel better.
Yeah.
And now you've lost all trust in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think, I guess they even had a big, I'm reading the rest of this, like it was someone, they posted this on social media. So, and then it went viral, right? So it was one of those things like, hey, look at this letter, look what they did. And I guess they were even told, they were brought into a meeting saying, you're all getting a raise this year. And so it was like a rah thing.
Oh.
So, just a massive fail. But maybe you have a better HR story that is not so much a massive fail.
Well, I have a couple stories, but I want to start with this one. So I was reading the HR Brew, which is, a magazine. They send out an email. And one of the articles was about sabbaticals, right? And so sabbaticals have been around for a long time, either paid or unpaid, have been around, especially in academia, right? And so in academia, it's really part of the culture there. After a certain amount of years, then you get a sabbatical. It's interesting, now that I think about this, Chuck, I've been doing some coaching for a university in Nashville with the deans. And I am having a blast with this just because I think back to my college days and the dean, right? Ooh, they were always so scary. But I'm working with these individuals and they're smart, intelligent people, but I can see they get a little burnout, right? And so you want to give them that sabbatical. And so this article was saying, look, this has been going on, especially in the tech sector for a long time. And with employment market, the market's so tight, right? They're so tight that this may be the next benefit to do. Now, I know we tried it at one corporation I was at, and maybe like 2 people took it. It's really hard to be like, hey, I'm going to take 2 months off while the rest of you work and just go do my own thing and that kind of stuff. So now I'm going to go back in a little bit in time, Chuck. So I did work in theater in the nonprofit world for a while.
Sure. Yes.
And individuals would get grants to take a sabbatical, but they would then go and learn their skill set and bring that skill set up, right? And so I remember I had a designer friend. He went and studied in Greece for 2 months to really learn Greece architecture, and, how they do things, Greek plays. And so, right, that's tied into, and so I think figuring that out in corporate, it's going to be tough, but it may be something to give your employees versus unlimited vacation, but maybe extended sabbaticals where everything's taken away from them and they go pursue something and then they bring that back to the company. I don't know. There's something.
Are those paid then? I know in some nonprofit worlds they are, but, or like you said, grants, but are they thinking give someone 2 months off unpaid or let them use their vacation?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on the organization. It will also depend on the different level in the organization. Look, this is probably not going to go down to frontline employees, right? This is going to go down to maybe director level, where they're doing something, they're working really hard and they want to like, hey, we're going to give you, we know you're burned out, to do it. I think that between the age of, now I know I'm probably going to yell at me for age discrimination and stuff, but between the age of 40 and 55, I think everyone should be rewarded a sabbatical, right? Because you get tired of your work, you're burned out, you've been doing the same thing for a long time. Give somebody off a couple months, they are going to come back more ready to go, right? And so kind of figuring that out.
What a neat idea.
Yeah.
Something
to think about on there anyway, it just popped in my news feed right before we went on. And so I just, oh, wow, I need to think about that. I need a sabbatical. It's really what I'm telling you.
Yeah. You need a sabbatical but do you need a union? I don't know. The transitions, the segues are out of control here on the HR Story podcast. So but I saw this in the regular news, and then I saw it in the HR news, where Dartmouth basketball team has voted to become unionized in a landmark vote, 13-2. They'll be the NCAA's first ever athletic union. And the interesting thing is that it's still really unclear what that means. The National Labor Relations Board views them as employees and says you can have a union, but the Department of Labor wage and hour is still kind of unclear of the wage and hour implications. But the whole idea is that the Dartmouth players, everything they do benefits a lot of the school. They play games, they sign autographs, they go to practice, they do these things, they get money for the school through their activities. So are they employees or are they not employees? And that, Mr. Watson, is the unanswered question.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I know this is going to play out over time and they're still trying to do it. It brings up, though, right? The Final Four just happened, and there was a lot of talk about the girls' Final Four and being the most watched sporting event in a long time and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about, what do those players get from that? Right? ESPN's doing well. NCAA's doing well. But are the players getting anything in there? And my guess is that I know they can go and get, right? They can get sponsors and do the sponsorship and that kind of stuff. But there's 9 people on each team. So that's 18 individuals. I can guarantee that not all of them are getting sponsors, right? Yeah. Now, Caitlin Clark, of course, she's big in the news, right? Everyone knows who she is. But what are the rest of them getting, right? And so I do think, again, it's a bigger conversation, right? And we need to look at that. But I don't know. I sometimes I do think it's unfair to the players who bring in all that money and who bring in all those funds for the university, right? Football players, right? All those. And, what are they getting for that?
Yeah, and just it's the unanswered question now as far as the wage and hour, but they're thinking, well, if the NLRB is using that common law employee test to state that they are employees, why can't the Department of Labor and the FLSA do the same? So, folks, stay tuned. You'll hear it first here, hopefully, on the HR Stories podcast once we do kind of get some more info as we move along with this story. And speaking of story, you have, I think, one more.
I do. Yeah, I have one more. And I want to think about that, right? Because I think one of the underlying thing there, Chuck, that you didn't mention is that it has become easier to unionize, right? And I know we've talked about that in the past, but I think as employers, HR representatives, if we don't want union houses, and there's benefits and not unbenefits, you need to figure out your strategy, and it needs to be a consistent strategy. It needs to be a strategy over time to make sure your employees don't feel emboldened to become unionized. And so just kind of thinking that through. Exactly. We had a big plant down here in Tennessee, down in Chattanooga, that I think is voting to go union. And so that's a big kind of thing in there.
That's a big deal for Tennessee. Yeah. But you've got a really neat angle on a story. We talked before we hit the record button. I can't wait for you to kind of.
Yeah. And so I know I'm, this is me not looking at the camera and stuff. I know, Samantha, but I wanted to, there's been a bunch of articles about this. And so this just popped up in my feed, and it's actually an old story, but somebody popped it up again. And so some researchers, some economists sent 80,000, right, fake resumes to see which companies discriminate the most. And then they ranked the top 100 companies. So on average, presumed white applicants received callbacks 9.5% more often than their black counterparts. And so what they did was they sent out all these resumes and they put names in there that would be more distinctly matched to a race or gender, right? And so examples include Todd for a white male, Leroy for a black male, Allison for a white female, and Lakeisha for a black female. And so they sent these out to all these individuals. The resume itself was the same, and they wanted to see who got callbacks and who didn't. And I'm looking for so both companies contacted white applicants between 33 and 43% more than black candidates. The top 20% firms from the study accounted roughly for 50% of the total discrimination. Every 1,000 applicants, white candidates received around 250 callbacks, where black applicants did 230. And that gap grew to 50 callbacks as well. So it's amazing to me. It's not amazing to me because I know this happens and I talk about it in my workshops, is that as hiring managers, as HR people, and as algorithms, they're looking at people's names and making a decision when they're going to hire them. And again, it's not like, oh, look, it's Leroy. I'm not hiring a Leroy. Now, I have been in rooms, and maybe you have too, Chuck. I have been in rooms where people look at a resume and go, I can't pronounce that name. I'm not hiring them.
Yeah.
Right. And so, again, I get that, but I think it's a little more subtle in this study where they look at the name and their biases come out and they make a lot of assumptions. And then they look at the resume and they downgrade it in their mind, in their bias, and they're like, oh, yeah, we can't hire that person. Where if it's a white name, they're looking at it and they're not downgrading it as much.
Yeah, more of a European-y type of name. So, wow. I mean, that really is, it is fascinating. And you can't argue with it. I mean, it's a study
80,000.
That's pretty it's cut and dry in a way. So fascinating.
And I think, I don't know, how does somebody handle that? Like what do you do to make sure that doesn't happen in your organization?
Yeah.
I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't know. If it's a real issue, you take the names off and you just, as the HR person, and you just send the resume through, and go from there. But HR folks have a responsibility to look out for these things to make sure those things aren't happening. If they hear someone say something like, oh, anytime you see a name like that, we got to pass that, and dealing with those things one off, and it's not as much of a training thing as it is an intervention thing.
Yeah. And so I've been doing some research on what they call noise in decision-making. And so a lot of times, right, some of this is all noise, not biases necessarily, but noise. And the only way to really get to know if there's noise happening in your systems is to do the data work, right? You have to do the data work. Like how many applicants are coming in, right? How many applicants are coming in, and what's our percentage of white, assuming white applicants, black applicants, Asian, whatever, women, gender, national origin, looking at all those, and then looking at that data and going, are we not unintentionally discriminating against, right? So we have disparate impact in there and getting some of that in there, right? And again, I'm diving into some of the details and that kind of stuff, and I know I'm going off the rail a little bit, but I do think it's a important subject. But I know, like an organization with 250 employees and 3 HR people, there's just not enough time to do that, right? And so I think just being aware of it and keeping it aware in the hiring managers, like, hey, we want to make sure that we're not doing that. And so be very careful how you think about the names and that kind of stuff. It's sad. It's sad that those things happen across the country.
Well, you're being honest, and that is the honest doctrine that you
I see where
epitomize. Am I
I see
getting
where you're
ahead? Am
going
I
with it.
leading into today's story?
I love that. That was a great. That you are Segway King today. I'm giving you Segway
I
bonuses today. That's all
yeah,
right. Well, then I
I
think
like
it's
it.
probably time for our break, and we'll get into the conversation about the honest belief doctrine, which I am fascinated to know about. And I'm like, when you sent me this story, I was like, oh, I never heard of this. Tell me more. So
Neither
I
did
think
I.
other people are going to be that way too, Chuck. So you want to take a break?
Let's take a break. You've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story.
Hi, it's me, John, from the team at HR Stories. We are often asked, how do I get better at HR? The simple answer is by practicing it. But as with most things in life, it isn't that easy. We make the best HR decisions when we have the knowledge, the systems, and guidance in place. Chuck and I founded the team at HR Stories to help HR practitioners get HR right. We are passionate about giving you the tools to excel at your job. For more information about upcoming workshops, resources, and our latest blogs, check out our website at the team at hrstories.com. Together, we are the team at HR Stories.
Welcome back to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story and where the twists and turns of HR are more thrilling than a roller coaster ride at an amusement park. Today, we've got a story that resonates with every HR professional out there. It's about Murray Fisher's battle against Airgas USA. That's right. Murray Fisher is the employee, the subject of our story today, and Airgas is the company. And this case takes us deep into the realms of something called the honest belief doctrine when it comes to and with in disability discrimination. I'm your host, Chuck Smickian, and with me is the ever curious, always insightful John Tallheimer.
Thanks, Chuck, for that wonderful introduction. Thrills in HR, you say. I got to be honest, I never thought I would hear you say those two words in the same sentence, but all right, I want to see. Blend them in for me.
Yeah. Well, you just wait, my friend John, because today we are delving into a case of Murray Fisher versus Airgas, and it's a story, like I said, hinges on that honest belief doctrine, which is a concept that's as tricky as trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in the dark.
Yeah, and so I mean, I remember you sent this story to me ahead of time, and I was like, honest belief doctrine, Chuck, are we talking about a legal drama or a new television detective series?
Yeah, sometimes they're one and the same, especially on the HR Stories podcast. But imagine this.
Okay.
An employer makes a decision firmly believing it's the right call. But what if that belief is based on a mistaken assumption? And that's where our story twists.
So it's like thinking all your ducks in a row and then finding out that they're actually flamingos.
Yes. Kinda, I guess. But yes,
All right.
you're on the right path. And
All right,
and
good.
and Murray Fisher's tale is a perfect example of how those ducks can lead into a legal labyrinth. Our listeners, you are in for a treat. This episode is packed with surprises, more surprises than maybe a mystery novel.
All right. Well, I'm ready to play detective. I got all my equipment. I am ready to go. Let's unravel this mystery, Chuck.
Yeah, so grabbing your magnifying glass, we're about to uncover these intricacies of the employment law, and it all begins with Murray Fisher working at Airgas as an operations technician. And in his role, he worked with combustible gases, used power tools, and drove company vehicles. But things took a dramatic turn when he was diagnosed with liver cancer in 2019.
Wow, right? Liver cancer. That must have been really tough on Mr. Fisher. How did Airgas handle that diagnosis?
Yeah, well, they initially handled it by the book. You know, when Mr. Fisher needed surgery in 2020, Airgas granted him 8 weeks of medical leave. It seemed like and Airgas is a fairly large company,
Yeah, yeah.
John. I've seen if you would see their trucks when I used to work at Universal Studios, they provided a lot of the it was like the nitrogen
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
oxide stuff that, you know, like it would, for a lot of the effects, like the
Yeah.
steam effects and the smoke effects and things like that. Big, large green trucks all over. Well, you know, they were following things by the book. They seemed to have a good HR team, and they accommodated the employees' needs. But that's just the calm before the storm in our story.
I guess there's a twist coming up.
Right, you are. So the twist in the tale begins when Fisher returns to work after his medical leave. Despite recovering from surgery, he's still grappling with pain and nausea. And those are side effects of his ongoing cancer treatments. And that's when a former coworker says, "Hey, dude, let me tell you something that would basically change the course of Fisher's life, and in this case, the course of Fisher's career at Airgas. It was a product called free hemp, free hemp. Now, when I hear free hemp, I'm like it was free, but no, I guess it's a type of hemp. I'm not as familiar with those intricacies of those things, but to be clear, we're not talking about marijuana here. You know, free hemp is a legal hemp product known for its pain relieving properties, and it's not something that Airgas had a policy against.
Yeah, it seems kind of, I mean, from what you're saying, it seems harmless, right? There's nothing, I mean, again, it's not marijuana. It's not, there's nothing against it. It's going to help him relieve pain. And so it seems like that's the great solution.
Yeah, and that's what Fisher thought too. So he starts using this free hemp product, right? A half teaspoon daily to manage his symptoms. Now, I don't know if he was like eating it or what, but apparently he was somehow ingesting it, and things start to spiral because in November 2020, Airgas, as part of their policy, randomly selects Mr. Fisher for a drug test. And the drug test was conducted by a company called HireRight. I've heard of HireRight before. I've seen their stuff out there. They're a big company that handles these big companies. And he came back with a positive result for marijuana. And he was stunned. You know, he's like, I have not used marijuana. I don't use marijuana. And he challenged the result. And he said, look, I think this is because of my use of free hemp, which could potentially cause a false positive.
All right. And so did he ask for a retest, and how did this go? Like, and so I'm kind of confused. So, all right. So again, this happens to a lot of people, right? We get that
Yeah.
result and we're like, that's not possible. You
Yeah.
need to retest. And so how did Airgas handle that?
Yeah, so you know, a lot of times with random tests and with current employees, we do grant them that. Sometimes I've had people say, "Oh, I've been taking Robitussin, I've been taking this, and I didn't really test positive for cocaine." You know, I mean, it's like, okay, all right, whatever. But yeah, Airgas agrees to a retest because that's the right thing to do. Let's retest. Maybe there's something else going on. But here's the catch. Here's the catch. They used the same sample for the retest. And, you know, crucially, on top of this, they didn't inform HireRight of Fisher's use of hemp or ask if it could cause a false positive for marijuana.
Okay, so I just want to be clear because I get a little lost on these things. So Fisher goes, gets the test. HireRight sends the test to Airgas. Airgas informs Fisher, like, hey, we got a positive for marijuana. Fisher says, well, I'm taking this free hemp. Can I get a retest? And so then Airgas then requests for a retest. Is that how that went through? Just trying to
Yes.
make sure I understand.
And that's exactly what happens. And it is common to use the same sample. You would think, oh, he'll go pee in a cup again, but then maybe he's cleaned himself out. So the thought process is the retest is on the lab side. The lab made a mistake. The lab misread things. But it's also common for and this is where it kind of gets a little muddy, because technically the higher right medical review officer, the MRO, would have contacted Mr. Fisher and would have said, are you doing anything that might cause this, and they give them that shot. But, it's this oversight that propels our story into the legal showdown, because Fisher, like I said, took it upon himself. Well, not like I said, but he actually took it upon himself to contact higher right about his hemp use. Then the higher right MRO finally clarified that Fisher tested positive for THCA, not THC, which is commonly associated with marijuana use.
And so when the medical review officer clarified that, who did they clarify that to? Was it to Airgas, yes, or did they say that to Fisher and say, oh, by the way, you tested positive for THCA and not THC? Or did they reach out to Airgas and say, hey, one of your employees there? I mean, because that detail has a huge implication.
Yeah, so that's where it kind of gets muddled, but apparently, like I said, huge, tiny details matter. THCA versus THC, that's a tiny detail with huge implications. And despite the retest and Fisher's explanation, the outcome remained unchanged, and Airgas ends up firing him for marijuana use, setting the stage for this legal battle that would basically challenge these boundaries of this thing called the honest belief doctrine and what it means for employees and employers alike. You see, here's the deal. After the retest, Fisher's sample once again came back positive for marijuana, despite his insistence that he hadn't used marijuana. His explanation about the hemp product, Airgas made a decision and basically officially fired Murray Fisher in December 2020. They cited the positive drug test as the reason, despite the nuances of the situation and Fisher's attempt to clarify the legal use of hemp. So yes, it was a positive drug test, but it was positive for THCA, not THC.
I just want to be, when higher right sent it back to Airgas, the retest, they said he had used marijuana.
They said he tested positive for THCA. So not THC. Okay. So they didn't say marijuana. They just give the technical term. So here's,
okay.
Yeah.
Right. So I think continue. I got where this is going, right? And this must have been really bad for Fisher, right? Now I'm terminated for something that I didn't do, and I'm dealing with cancer. And he tried, right? He tried to explain this situation. So wow.
Yeah. And he reaches out to Airgas for reinstatement. And he says, look, do not label me as being fired for drug use. This is where things get complex. So Sherry Shiflett, Sherry, if you're listening out there, the Airgas's vice president of HR informs Murray Fisher that the positive test was confirmed for THC, not THCA. But then in an interesting twist, and this is where things get muddled, Dr. Simo from Higher Right stated in the affidavit in the court case that Fisher tested positive for THCA, not THC. And this is the detail that raises the questions about the investigation process and the information used to make a termination decision. And this discrepancy became a focal point of Fisher's lawsuit against Airgas, where he claimed disability discrimination.
Okay, so I want to get in because that confuses me, and I definitely want to talk about disability discrimination, but I want to go back. So the vice president of human resources says, no, your positive test confirmed for THC and not THCA, and that's why we fired you. And then in the court case, the doctor says, no, we sent it as THCA. So we don't know if somebody misinformed the human resources person or if she was just going, we don't want this person here, so we'll do that because he has this disability. Is that what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, and that's the crux here, sloppy investigation. THC, THCA, tomato, but Fisher comes back and says, you know what? Here's my argument. And I know you and I talked a little bit about this off cycle, off camera. And I said, in the end, I think this guy, Murray Fisher, had great lawyers. And Airgas did not have great lawyers because had they uncovered all this, they probably said, folks, we just need to settle this. And in the end, which we'll get to, but he says, look, I was terminated. It wasn't about the drug test, but it was also about how my cancer diagnosis and treatment were perceived and handled by Airgas. So Fisher's out of a job. He's feeling wrong. He decides, it's time to challenge this termination in court. So March 2021, he takes Airgas to court, alleging disability discrimination in violation of Ohio law. And this wasn't about a drug test anymore. It was about how his cancer and its treatment, were possibly influencing Airgas's decision making.
Yeah, really, it's about Airgas's decision making and what influenced them to terminate them, right? Because it escalated from a simple drug test, like, hey, random drug test, everyone, you got to do your random drug test. And I'm sure Fisher was like, no big deal. All right. And then finding out that he's fired and feeling that he's being discriminated against based on his cancer diagnosis, based on probably some accommodations that he needs. It's a large leap.
Yeah, and he argued that it was beyond this honest belief doctrine where they made a decision based on their honest belief. He says, you know what? They weren't just an honest mistake, but they were influenced by my medical condition. But Airgas had this defense hinging on the belief that the drug test results from HireRight, and they maintained that they honestly believe is using marijuana. And it just, it was two very confident people. But here's the deal. They were confident in their decision. And on the surface, remember, in legal battles, the devil's often in the details. So Fisher brought up some important questions about the adequacy of and I know we talk a lot about investigations, but the adequacy or inadequacy of their investigation into his claims and whether they considered all the relevant information before making their decision.
I mean, it's crucial, right? I mean, again, how did they make that decision? What was the depth of the investigation? Did they like, oh, well, yeah, that's close enough, right? And maybe the people that were making that decision didn't know the difference between THCA and THC and just saw, oh, that's marijuana. We have a policy that says marijuana, we don't do it. Boom, right? And so I think that's really the depth of that investigation is critical.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's close enough is only good in what horseshoes and hand grenades, as they say. So, it's one thing to have a policy and apply it fairly and thoughtfully. The court had to consider whether Airgas had really made a reasonably informed and considered decision. And ultimately, I'm excited to share that that as we delve deeper into this drama, we actually reach a pivotal moment. You see, the district court's initial decision. So it goes to court, the initial decision, and the intricacies come to the forefront because Airgas stands firm on their stance, right? This is our stance, and to fire Fisher, and it's based on the honest belief. We don't know. This is what we thought. This is our honest belief that he violated policy.
Yeah, so I mean, again, right? That makes sense to me. Like, okay, based on this information, right? Whether that information was wrong or right, they felt it was right. They're going to get rid of this employee because they violated a company policy, which makes sense.
And so that's where things get twisted because the district court actually granted judgment to Airgas, which meant that they believed the reason for Airgas's decision for firing Fisher did not amount to pretextual discrimination, but really was an honest belief that he, had broken company policy.
And I think that makes sense from what, I mean, again, looking at it from the district court and their opinions, it makes sense to me. All right, I get it.
Yeah. And so the district court bought into that honest belief argument. But John, my friend, or as we shall say, Mr. Watson, here's, as in any good story, there is a plot twist. Fisher wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet, so he takes it to the appeals. Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals reviews the case. They see things differently. They focused on whether Airgas had conducted a thorough investigation into the claim of his hemp use, which could have led to the positive drug test. You know, sometimes I see companies, John, that they just want to just get rid of it, you know, half-baked investigation. I think it's good enough. You know, the employee, they'll go away and we'll all be fine. This guy wasn't going away. And the court ends up looking at the specifics at the investigation that Airgas conducted, or rather didn't conduct. And so the key here they felt was, had Airgas made a reasonably informed and considered decision based on their investigation? And they said, no, you fell short.
Right. And this is getting more intriguing by the minute. And so how did Airgas respond? And I have another follow-up question. I'll see if we can get it in there a little bit later. But I'm just fascinated.
They were in a tough spot. The appellate court findings challenged their investigation, the adequacy of it. And that's why, as you and I say, investigation is so important. Document, document, document. Leave no stone unturned.
Yeah, right. And that's what I was thinking is like, maybe, and I don't know, maybe you're going to talk about this, but maybe there just wasn't documentation, right? There was no documentation on this was the process that we went through, right? We sat down, we had a conversation, but no one documented it. And so Airgas got on the wrong side of that. Fascinating. So it sounds like this case is more than just a policy violation. It's about how employers need to consider individual circumstances in each situation.
Yeah, bingo. And that's the lesson that resonates and should resonate with every HR professional here today. They flipped the script. After reviewing the case, the appellate court had a different take on the whole situation.
Wow, that's big, right? That's a big thing. You know, the courts don't like to do that, but they will do it when it makes sense. So that's big in legal terms.
Yeah, and you know, we've talked about the adequacy of the investigation, but the court also highlighted that Airgas had not only failed to properly investigate the explanation, but it also, and this is documented in the court case documents, also didn't ask HireRight whether hemp usage could lead to a positive false test.
A little significant oversight there. We won't talk to the experts.
Yeah. It's really bizarre because I deal with drug tests all the time in all different types of companies that I've worked for and consulted for. So it was a crucial failure in another term we like to use in our classes, due diligence. And the lack of investigation meant that Airgas could not rely on the honest belief defense. In other words, once again, the lack of investigation says how can you say you have an honest belief that you were doing the right thing when you didn't even investigate it? It was kind of like it was a paper tiger investigation.
Yeah,
And
like, oh yeah, we investigated, but they didn't really do it.
yeah, they hadn't made a reasonably informed and considered decision.
Yeah, so what does this mean for Fisher? And then more broadly, what does it mean for us, employment practices, and how we need to do this?
Yeah, so for Fisher, hey, it's a ray of hope, a chance to contest his wrongful termination, and but it's a stark reminder of the importance of conducting thorough investigations into employment claims. We actually, folks, did a class. It's available on demand on how to conduct an HR investigation, and you could find that at team@hrstories.com.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I remember sitting in that class, Chuck, and just listening you go through the process, and it was obviously you've done this 100 times, if not 1,000 times, and thinking about like, okay, these are the things we need to do. And I think Airgas, I think what you said earlier, Airgas made the decision like, yeah, it's not that important. We're not going to put much energy into it. And they really do it. So really, it's not about having just policies, but it's about how you apply them to the individual situation.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, the thoroughness and the fairness of the investigation process when terminations, and I see it all the time. Look, as an HR person, someone gets terminated and the manager says, oh yeah, they did this and they did that and they walked off the job and they left early and all that stuff. And you just want to be like, all right, I believe the manager and write it off. But especially if it's a sensitive termination or there's something else, you look at the time logs, you look at if there are any cameras, it's just, you just have to do some sort of diligence, because a lot of times it's just like, oh, okay, boom, we're done, and it's a practical lesson in how we manage and investigate really any employee issue.
Yeah, and it's right. It's about that due diligence, and I'm thinking, Chuck, that the checklist that you have in the book of checklists is so important for investigations, having that process to go through. And you can't assume that the information you're first hearing is the full truth, right? And so we have to make sure that we do that and get that diligence in there.
Yeah. So once again, looking beyond the surface, truly understanding the employee's side of the story.
Yeah, fair application. It's not just about fair application of policy, but it's about how we apply them into the workplace that we're in.
Yep. Right on target. So as we wrap up today's episode, let's just highlight some quick key takeaways in this saga. First, never underestimate the power of a well-conducted investigation. And secondly, the honest belief doctrine has its boundaries, and it's crucial to ensure decisions are informed and well considered.
It's about balancing policy with empathy and understanding. In this case, investigation, right? Because yes, Airgas was probably empathetic to him until they weren't.
Yeah. Yeah, and exactly. And it teaches us HR isn't just about following rules. It's about interpreting and applying them with humanity and fairness.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important lesson for all of us in HR, talent management, CEOs, right? Any final thoughts, Chuck?
Yeah, no, I kind of keep saying the same thing over and over. So I just want to make sure, once again, it's about each case, each individual brings a unique challenge, unique perspective. And our role is not just to enforce the policies, but ensure the fairness in the workplace, which ultimately protects the company.
Yeah, right. And I think that's the thing. And I do think that sometimes you and I fall victim to this, as we are like, okay, we're just going to go through. This is the process, blah, 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 blah. And we need to step out of that process sometimes and really go, okay, what's the right thing? How do we do this? How do we make this right for everyone? And keeping the policies in mind, let's not throw them out the window, but doing that. Chuck, I got to really appreciate you. You've done a great job at guiding us through this very intricate case. it's really been eye-opening for me and really trying to think about how I apply this in my everyday work for sure.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. And to our listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this case and your experiences. How do you navigate these complex HR situations in your workplace? Share it with us in the comments below or through our social media channels, and those links are in the story notes.
Yeah, and everyone, don't forget to tune in for the next HR Story podcast where there is a lesson in every story. Until then, keep navigating these waters with care and consideration, making sure your flamingos are really flamingos and your ducks are ducks. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Do you like listening to the HR Stories podcast? Are there times you want to interject or ask a question? Every month, the team at HR Stories invites HR professionals and practitioners to the HR kitchen table to discuss what is happening in HR. In a small group format, up to 12 individuals will share their wisdom, hold each other accountable, and share a few laughs. HR Kitchen Table is free, but you need to register to get your seat. Go to our website at the team at hrstories.com/workshops and sign up now so you can join us. Let's talk HR.